Hello and welcome to CFO.com. My name is Amol Dethe. And in this special series, Future of Compliance, brought to you by Clear from the makers of Clear Tax, we are going to discuss ease of compliance, how to simplify and be efficient. And I have with me Rahul Cordeiro, the CFO of Wipro G Healthcare, and Rohit Razdan, the CB of Clear. Gentlemen, glad to have you.
Thank you,
Hi,
Amol.
Amol.
Glad to be here.
Good to have you guys.
Thank you so much. So we are going to discuss ease of compliance, how to simplify and be efficient, gentlemen, in this special series about future of compliance at etcfo.com. So to begin with, Rahul, I will come to you and let me understand your basic perspective, or to start with the basic things specifically on what are the major challenges that you face with the while managing the compliance. What are the challenges that, or how the CFOs actually grapple with the compliance to begin with?
Sure. I think Amol and Rohit, we are living through interesting times. Pace of change on the business and industry side is extremely fast. When you look at it, customers want different things. Business models are evolving and changing very quickly. Go-to markets are changing around. Add to this, most of us are working in some sort of a remote or work from home or hybrid environment, and people are obviously dispersed. So with all of this, you're constantly playing catch up in some way. Then just coming to the overall landscape of compliance in India, I don't need to tell you guys that we're extremely complex. So there are just so many legislations. You have your tax law, your companies law, you have your various state laws and labor laws. There's just many laws that at any point in time that apply to us. So I was looking at it. There are just so many ministries that govern most industries, and it's quite mind-boggling at times. So I think the challenge is really keeping up with these. There is no margin for error, right, on compliance. So as good corporate citizens and country citizens, we try to ensure that we are compliant at all times. And then you look at it from a perspective of the regulator as well. They are also trying to make sure that the companies and the industry are functioning in a certain certain environment so that it's healthy for all. So all in all, a very challenging situation, but nonetheless something that we have to keep up with and ensure that we are on top of.
Okay, that was good to begin with, Rahul. And let me come to you, Rohit. I think you can give a different perspective because you're also a solution offering, providing company to the CFOs and the whole world. So, right, what is your perspective? How do you see the CFOs challenging with the compliance? What are the major challenges that you see CFOs face?
So thank you firstly, Amol, for the discussion, and Rahul for his perspective. So, I'll start by saying that, we live in a very young country which has undergone a massive digitization on the consumer side, right? Which I think all of us understand. And between like 2011 2012 to now, it's like a different world in terms of technology consumption. I think few people appreciate on B2B side how quickly technology is penetrating every single front of that, right? And over there is obviously the same forces of the geo and cables and cheaper devices and faster computers, all of these things. And on top of it, there is government which is now forcing a bunch of things, right? Now, when you look at compliance itself, right? Some of us are old enough to remember how things were 10, 15 years back, right? In terms of compliance, right? There were a lot of things which were considered optional, and there was no sync between, things were just so complicated, right? Rahul talked about things being complicated now. 15 years back, they were so complicated that people had kind of given up. So people could do their own excise filings, their own return. There was very few things that could be implemented in a logical, coherent manner, right? From there, the government, because of their revenue and all the initiatives that they have to do, and the level of funding they have to do for infrastructure in the country, right? They have decided that they have to get enough taxation revenue from the businesses. On the individual side, as you guys are aware, our taxation rates, peak rates have reached 40%, 45%, right? So they have nowhere else to go but to businesses, right? Agriculture, obviously right now, probably they will not be touching, right? On the business side, the only way this could happen, in our opinion, and that's the stance that they seem to be taking, is twofold, right? Number one, technology led, not like technology enabled in a small way, technology led, right? And what we have been seeing is, like, if you look at what we have done now with electronic invoicing in our country, right? Like, honestly, we are in the taxation technology space, right? Clear tax, right? Even we were surprised by the pace of how the government brought it in the middle of COVID, right? And to have real-time invoicing happen for today, 90% of the GDP or 75-80% of the GDP of the country is something that even took us by surprise, right? So one is, so they have decided to do it digitally, right? Secondly, I think they have one way or the other decided that they will do it in a networked kind of a manner, right? Which means that if you are compliant, you will find it easy to do business, right? And they have included, I don't want to get like too technical here, but like, this input tax credit regime, the way they have implemented. See, there are different ways of even digitizing things, right? The way they have implemented is that if you are fully compliant, then you will have a very happy customer, and therefore you will get a lot more business in a single shot. By single shot, I mean in the last 3 to 4 years, if you see, right? They have done this massive change, which on top of the existing digitization forces in the country is meaning massive change on the B2B side. Okay. And this is, in my opinion, only understood by people who live it every day. Other people do not have appreciation for this, right? They have appreciation for cell phone apps. They do not have appreciation for, web apps and all of these things. So that is my perspective. I think it's a very, very interesting change, and it will lead to a lot of GDP unlock, honestly, over a period of time in the country.
Right. I think very well said, Rohit. I remember a CFO from a very old traditional company told me that things have changed so much that I can't believe that I used to spend 3 hours waiting outside IT officers, came in, just to get some clarification. And I think your points are valid in terms of, the way the government has worked and real-time data and all. In specifically, GST is a great example. I think the government was far more aggressive, than the even than the industry. The industry gave a suggestion, and there was some clarification from the government, I think, on the GST side. So I think sounds really good. But to begin with, like you said, CFOs are the one who's actually facing all this compliance and all the challenges. So Rahul, let me come back to you and maybe ask you something very specific. So everybody says, there has to be an ease of compliance. There should be an ease of business. So from CFO's lens, what would it mean to simplify compliance at an organizational level?
I think I'm going to touch on some of the points that Rohit brought out as well here. So one is when we talk about ease of compliance, really a reduction in the number of compliances. Maybe the data collection, maybe the number of submissions don't need to change, but really an interlock. And Rohit mentioned this, things are moving digital at a very fast pace. We're somewhere in a transitionary phase right now, where some of these things are digital, some of them are still physical or this separate kind of submissions. But can we consolidate? Can we look at it either at a legislation level? Can we look at it either at a data point level? So I'll give you an example. So today, so much of data is going into the GST filing. So much of data and so many transactions are being brought under the GST net. Can that somehow be used instead of having things like TDS and TCS, which kind of put a lot of additional compliance pressure? So small steps like that will have in my view, a very disproportionate impact and unlock some of the GDP, etc. that Rohit was mentioning. It's a situation of less is more very often, and how do we use technology and digital tools to really unlock that is essentially, I think, how we would need to look at it.
Okay, Rahul. So Rohit, let me ask you now something very specific about the technology. Everybody says, technology is a great tool, digital is the future, and that is how the company should go ahead. But non-compliance, if we look at, is the major challenge for the CFO, because they do not want to go for non-compliance. They want to be, perfectly fine, do a compliance, mitigate all the risks and something like that. So considering these points, Rohit, can you make me understand, how technology can be used to simplify, compliance to a great extent and mitigate the risks, which may, help them, which can actually make them fall into the non-compliance bracket?
Yeah, Amol, great question. Let me before I jump into that specific question, right? Let me just talk about from a context of the economy that we are in, and the need for what does it mean to not be compliant, right? At multiple levels, right? We are in a part of the 200 economies around the world which is broadly, as we say, emerging markets, right? In emerging markets, as so much capital over the last 10 to 20 years has started to come, right? The capital is basically looking for quality assets, which are in general tough to find in emerging market. In general, right? I'm not saying they're not there, but they're interspersed with a lot of questionable quality, right? Now, what we have seen is once you prove yourself to be high quality, okay, a lot of people will take bets on you, right? And people know there are many things that people in emerging markets cannot control, right? Like, for example, you cannot control your currency, right? That's a government control thing, right? You cannot control sometimes, these bunds and riots and this. Those are outside of a company's control. Right. Compliance and governance is in company's control, right? So therefore, in my opinion, and there is a very nice IFC study, right? International Finance Corporation study that says that around 50% of institutional investors that they interviewed said that for a higher governance compliance company, they will be ready to pay a 25% higher multiple, okay, in terms of valuation multiples, okay? So that is direct value, right? So compliance, like one thing is like it's good to be compliant, right? That's one stance to take. Another is it's good business to be compliant, right? So and it creates value for the shareholders. So therefore, it is not just something that my father said you have to be compliant, or my government said you have to be compliant, right? It is good business to be compliant. That's our first stance that we talk to whenever we talk to, and we talk to a lot of people who are making transition from different levels of formalization to much more higher levels of formalization, right? And this is what I try to explain to them, that why you should do this, because your business will profit because of this, right? Number one. Now, let me talk specifically about the question, sir, how do we make it easier, right? So there's multiple things. As Rahul earlier mentioned, right? There is actually a plethora of compliances around, and the first step is just the interpretation of the law to what actually, how it should be implemented. Okay, that itself, right? And what we do, how we do things is we bring a marriage of this accountants and chartered accountants and finance domain experts, right? With engineering and product experts, right? Who come together to say this is the right interpretation. Number one. Number two is that right interpretation should be easy to understand. Okay. Right? Like, so like Rahul would be aware of, like, there's this whole thing called reconciliations, right? That happens in every finance function around the world. But for the kind of digitalization that we have taken, every finance professional in this country would probably agree the reconciliation road has increased 10x in the last 3 to 4 years, right? And it's not easy, right? It also like scales non-linearly, right? By which I mean, as the number of records increases, the time actually exponentially increases, right? So that has to be brought together with technology so that you can give a sharp perspective to a finance guy in terms of what is matching, what is not matching, what needs to be double clicked, otherwise you are just lost in data. And at some point of time, we are all human beings, we give up, right? So technology, what we focus on is how do we make, in addition to interpreting the law, how do we make that easier, right? The third thing that we feel is very, very important is that many of the, I would say, slightly larger size or mid or large size businesses, right? They already have old legacy ERPs, accounting systems, and so on, right? Whether we like it or not, those are sitting with a lot of data, which is important to the businesses, right? And a lot of businesses are trying to upgrade their ERPs, upgrade their what we call backbone technology, right? Which is the ERPs and the CRMs. But what we have done is we have built connectors into their core systems so that the data that is sitting there can be extracted, right? Rightly modified and then submitted to the government. I know this sounds very, very easy, right? But it's actually very, very complex because of, every finance professional would agree that, to pull out data from one file to the other, to have like these hundreds of Excels flying is not easy, right? So those are the things that we do. And the only last thing I would mention, what we are also trying to do, which is a different approach, is we are taking a platform approach where what we are saying is, let's say Rahul's company is sitting in the middle. They should have a platform where their vendors and their distributors should be able to look at the same source of truth, because otherwise there's a lot of back and forth and communication that happens. Yeah, submit nahi kiya, you need to submit this is submitted, that communication, right, is very, very complex. And so there is another layer of I would say slightly forward looking things that how we are thinking about it. Other people obviously may have different approaches.
A detailed one, Rohit, thanks for adding that note here. Rahul, I will come to you. I think, the whole, now the game is, how do you actually simplify things, at far more seamless manner, as early as possible, as quick as possible, and then react on it is far more important. So Rahul, I have slightly different question here. Obviously the compliance is an integral part of a CFO's desk, but how do you actually ensure that the compliance function is making the transformation for a value creation of the company, or to which will help also the company to create the values?
I'm from the same school of thought as Rohit.
Okay.
Compliance is good business. It is not just a hygiene factor. We must do it. We do it. It must be done well, and it must be done with the right mindset. So culturally, we try to ensure that our people and across the organization, it starts from the board, it goes to the CEO and the leadership team, and then the entire, not just the finance team, but the broader team as well, right? So unless everyone has that mindset, you're kind of slated to fail at the get-go, right? So I think it has to be endemic in the organization. It has to be brought out as something as one of the core cultural values of the organization, because I rely a lot on, say, our legal team, our HR team, our sales teams to ensure that things are run in a certain way. Because finally, the compliance ends up being the downstream part of it, right? There's all this upstream effort that goes into making things seamless into the downstream. So I think that's the first thing really that you got to do. So it's in my view just good business sense. The way I also look at it, and something that today, as we digitize and get better at it, compliance is this wealth of data and information, right? So how do we better leverage this? How do we kind of churn this data into analytics to help business decisioning is another way to look at it, right? For value creation. Personally, I think there's so much data out there that we don't do justice on really utilizing it in the right places. If we look at all our GST returns and really put it in the hands of a great analytics guy, he's going to be able to give you 2 or 3 insights which can really be productive on the business decisioning side. That's just one other thought which I think is a little forward looking again, but something that can be put to good use as we digitize better, use tools and technology to a greater advantage. Finally, the way I see it, compliance is a differentiator. And Rohit said this when he said that it adds value from a shareholder perspective. I would say it adds a ton of value from a customer perspective. Customers are willing to deal with you and pay a slight premium because they know that what you stand for. They know that, hey, you're not going to go cheat them on something. You get a tag. You get a little bit of brownies and a tag as a good compliant corporate citizen. And that adds value to your stature, to what you bring to the table, and you can drive a lot of good behaviors and good business decisions out of that, right? And finally, compliance does weed out the fly-by-night guys. There are these guys who just can't sustain what is required, and that's the core intent finally of the government and the authorities in having these rules and regulations, that it weeds out the undesired elements there. So as long as you're a good corporate citizen, the opportunities are there for the picking. A lot of value creation.
Okay. Noted your points, Rahul. Rohit, let me ask you one more specific question about the technology. And as we understand the technology, digital will play a major role, in terms of making compliance seamless. Why, is it that technology an imperative if enterprises want to be compliant? And at the same time, how can it be efficient and ensure ITC claims are also smooth? Because that is also one of the integral part when it comes to compliance, right? I mean, not the only, fulfilling what the government wants, but also what is pending from the government side.
So see, I think, Amol, my brief view would be that given the fact that our compliance is not super simple, I think, let me put it this way, right? It has its heart in the right place, okay? And I think when you take a 5-10 year view, right, I think it will become simplified, right? I heard Rahul talk about, TDS, TCS and some of these things, and we have a lot of this data, and in our opinion, we will see a lot of these things merging, right? Like 5 years down the line, in my opinion, GST and invoicing will be very difficult to tell apart, right? Because all the data is the same, right? So there's some legacy right now, but I think this will happen, right? Now, what will also happen is that the the stick that the government has, right, for you to not be compliant, which is input tax credits, right? I think it becomes, without technology, it becomes almost impossible, okay, for you to be, I would say, to not be bleeding even a little bit, okay? And we've had some very interesting. So okay, I'll just give you guys an example, right? We have made an automated, input tax credit maximizer, okay, which basically goes in your ERP and interrupts the payments smartly, right? For example, if you have a electricity or a BSNL or something, right, and they are not paying you input tax credits, then you still continue to pay them, right? And then you have habitual offenders, you treat them a certain way, you hold their payments. And then you have people which are not habitual offenders, and you treat them slightly differently and so on, right? And the reason for us to make this product is we saw from our data, right, that every month, right, and when we extrapolate it to the GST itself, right, there's around 7,000 to 10,000 crores, right, which is basically input tax credit, which is unclaimed for whatever reason, right? It's and as you know, it's like roughly 1 lakh crore, right? So it's roughly 8 to 10%, right, is actually stuck there. And it's all, your and my businesses, right? Like it's all coming from us, right? It's not coming from some vague business, right? But it becomes such a difficult thing to track. And what happens is input tax rates, most of the companies take a very manual, sincere, but manual approach. So what happens is the first 80%, everybody can get, okay? The next 10, 15% with killing your teams on the weekend, 12 baje raat mein kaam karke tak, okay, you can probably get that, right? Last 5-7% is next to impossible to track because it goes from month to month to month, right? And there's so many small guys where it gets distributed that it's like trying to pick up pennies. Right? Those pennies look very small, but when you do it for 12 months, those pennies add up. When you especially look in the context of low margin businesses, right? It is like 10-20% of their profitability, right?
Exactly.
So unless you go to an automated reconciliation, automated communication, automated payment kind of a system, in our opinion, it is impossible no matter how good your heart is, and you need technology there. So we have a very strong position there.
Noted, Rohit. So Rahul, I mean, compliance is not going to end, by ticking, what you can say, few boxes in one go. Okay. It goes on changing, maybe you will have your expansion plans, and regulators will also come with an expansion plans, right? They will also add on to list. And if you look at regulators like SEBI and RBI, they have also been adding filters every year, every now and then. So my question to you is how tough it is for you to deal with this, what you can say, ever-changing compliances. How should businesses cope up with all this ever-changing, or what you can say, never-ending compliances?
So I think you said it right, Amol, when you said that the filters and the requirements keep increasing. Now, I think one is really how the business is itself evolving. So the regulators themselves are kind of keeping lockstep with that and ensuring that they keep their checks and filters in place. The way I see it, you have to approach it in 2 or 3 buckets, right? One is on the cultural aspects. I spoke about this already. Our teams have to have the mindset that they are going to comply. Every transaction is looked at that way. And it's not just the finance team or the legal team or the compliance team. It starts way upstream, right? So it starts with our kind of sales teams and even the product design teams, etc. Right? So all of that has to flow through for us to be a compliant company finally at the end of the day, right? So cultural mindset, very, very critical. Then you come to the people, right? Having the right people and people who are able to, Rohit said this, they're subject matter experts, they are able to interpret, and when I say people, it's not just your internal team, right? It's your partners. It could be anyone on the outside of the company, internal to your company, but you have the right people in place who, one, understand and interpret the law and the requirements, and two, are able to link that up to your business processes and identify the requirements, right? So, and obviously keeping that fresh, and since it keeps changing, you have to stay current, right? So, you have to rely on some level of technology, some level of support there to say, you're never going to have a subject matter expert in every obscure law, right? So you need to rely on, say, a ready reckoner of hey, these are my compliance, this is my checklist. You've got to make it predictable, right? And easy. So it has to go through those steps. And finally, your processes, controls, and technology is going to be finally the last pillar that you really hang your hat on, because unless your processes are geared, your ERPs and your manual processes and otherwise are geared towards this, it's going to be a failing effort at the get go. So and the more we start to rely on technology, the more successful we are going to be, because nirvana is going to be, hey, my ERPs, then it's automatically feeding what the government wants.
Right.
That's when the day that we won't have a job left, which is, but I think that's finally what we got to target, that how do we make ourselves redundant and get to a point where our machines are directly feeding one another, right? So I think that's the approach that we got to take, really culture, people, and process and technology.
Noted, Rahul. So let me pick the same question for you as well, Rohit, what I asked to Rahul, the ever-changing compliance. So I copied one nice line that you said, that we marry or we merge the tax experts and the IT experts and try to offer the compliance solutions here. So, how do you also try and manage the need of the ever-changing compliance? Because from the regulatory side, it's been constantly changing. Today RBI will have 10 compliance rules. Suddenly next week there will be 20 rules, right? And you will have to also add those filters in your system, so that the companies will find it really seamless. So how do you actually cope up with this?
Yeah, see, it's not easy, right? See, first things first, we start with a lot of empathy for what the government is trying to do, right? See, I'll tell you, the time it took for us to implement a new SAP ERP system is the same time in which the government implemented their e-invoicing system in the country. Okay, so we first have to start with a lot of empathy, that and how they are doing things, right? It's not easy for them, right? And the number of communication, it's like mind-boggling, the level of complexity they would be going at, right? Second thing I would tell you is, there was obviously a fair degree of, we would remember when GST came in, there was a lot of, I would say, ups and downs, kind of during the implementation process. If you see in e-invoicing, they really learned, right? They implemented it step by step by step, right? And what we see, right, and we are in a very fortunate position as the largest consumer of these APIs in the country, right? We actually find the government to be very, very open, and the quasi government bodies like NIC, GSTN, and so on, very, very open, very, very supportive, right? And they give us a sense of where they are going, right? And just like any other company, right, their roadmap sometimes go forward, back, and so do ours, right? So honestly, like, we couldn't ask for too much better than what they have right now. In an ideal world, there would be a few things that they could do better, but we all could do better, right? But I would say how we do things is, we expect change, right? We have conversations with them, and by the way, these conversations are there for anybody to do, right? So government, there are these free things that you go and literally you have like senior GSTN and so on officials sitting on a Zoom link answering questions, right? Writing emails, right? Sometimes 11 in the night, 12 in the night, right? So, I mean, if you want, right, you can get a very clear direction. For example, government has very, very clearly said that there will be a network, a communication network between larger companies and smaller companies. They have very, very clearly said, B2C QR codes are also going to come, or B2B codes or B2C codes below 50 crores is going to come. They have said this for 1 year now, right? Now it's up to us to get ready for that. Whether that happens in December or that happens in April or that happens in June, doesn't matter, right? For us also, we have to build things, right? So in our opinion, to be honest, right, we are in a country which has a lot of diversity, and therefore things are tough, right? We are with dealing with finance professionals and so on that have not, that are not born on technology, right? There's some teams, right? So there's some challenges that we all face, but in our opinion, there is enough guidance that is available if you are really in that business. And this is true of GST and so on, which we are aware of. But if you ask any banks, they know where RBI is going. They know their stance very, very clearly. They put out 50 different things. And even if then you are also not prepared, I don't know what to say.
Right. Copy your points, Rohit. I do not know, we already spoke for half an hour. I didn't realize how the time passed by. But let me shoot one more question to both of you. And again, that question is specifically about future of compliance. That's the topic that we're discussing. So we discussed many parts here in terms of the changes, challenges that we are witnessing in the compliance sector. So Rahul, I will start with you. And this is, a very important question in terms of the future. Any genuine company, any honest company wants to build a good book, would always like to comply and, go with the regulators and follow all the tick boxes, right? But to do that, there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of issues also. Going ahead, as we see the digital is growing, technology adoption is also high. At the same time, there are a lot of changes in the economy as a whole. So what kind of, changes do you see in the compliance going ahead in next 2 to 3 years? And are you prepared for it? If yes, how are you going to prepare yourself? Because I'm sure the sector that you're operating in also will go through a major changes in next 3 to 5 years, right?
Amol, I think there's going to be a lot of change. I mentioned this earlier. We are in the middle of a transition. I think we are probably closer to the beginning than the end at this point. So there's a lot going to happen across industries. Specifically, if I look at my industry, which is medical devices, we are currently undergoing the medical device rule implementation, which requires every product to be registered and licensed and before it's sold. So there's a sea change happening there. That's just one example. When you look at the broader industry, there's just so much happening across the board, right? So what I do expect is that there will be some level of convergence, as things start to get under a single net. Even for the government and the regulators, it becomes easier to monitor transactions under a single net rather than multiple whole transactions, right? So I think they are going to start to converge. GST is one example because finally, you had so many different levies. They're all brought under GST. There will be more and more to come across the board in my view, and I think things will start to look simpler from that perspective. We will go through a little bit of a transition again, like we did with GST, right? Think back to 2017. Everyone was in a tizzy with the introduction of GST, but sitting where we are today, when we look back, things are functioning great. Same with e-invoicing. When it was first introduced, there was some uncertainty. We got through the teething issues. And, I'll echo Rohit here. The government did a great job in stating intent, giving their kind of a roadmap and blueprint. There were teething issues for sure, like any big implementation. When we implement SAP or whatever in our companies, we have, any ERP for that matter, we have so many teething issues. And just think of the scale of the implementation. We're talking nationwide, state by state, kind of IGST, SGST, CGST level, getting every state engaged. I think it's a huge effort, those kind of things. So these things are going to get more and more prevalent. The GST is going to be the blueprint of how a lot of these things were done. I think, and it's going to become more kind of peer-to-peer, as we go, because today, like Rohit said, we are spending an inordinate amount of time reconciling stuff. So how do I link, hey, his output is my input, and make sure that I don't lose any money in the bargain, is going to become a peer-to-peer kind of thing over time as the transactions get streamlined, as the reporting gets streamlined. Those kind of things are going to become very, very kind of embedded in the system. I think what we rely on to prepare for these things is really try to stay ahead of the curve. We keep the attempt is obviously to understand and stay abreast of what the changes are and what's coming. And I think we have to plan ahead, because something like a GST or an invoicing requires a lot of effort, right? So you got to get the right team in place. You got to kind of put in your systems, make sure that all your processes are geared to it. You're doing communications to your vendors, suppliers, as well as customers. So it requires an end-to-end view to make sure you are not missing out on anything. We obviously invest in technology. We try to stay current, and we try to have good partners who help us through this at any point in time. So all of this is I think required to stay current and stay ahead of all the changes that are coming.
So Rohit, I will also take your views on the view specifically for the next 3 to 5 years, because as we discussing, as we discussed that things are going to evolve far more rapidly. Perhaps vendor management, e-invoicing, everything is going to be digital. and everything will be, everything will be done on the technology platform, right? So how do you see the major change with the compliance in next 3 to 5 years, and what kind of changes do you see in the industry?
Yeah, see, I think, broadly speaking, if you look at how our government generally has been functioning, right, in any particular area, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is, civic governance, whether it is taxation, whatever it is, right, they take one thing and they figure out a process and system to do that, and then they replicate the same system in 50 different places, right? Like, let's say they figure out how to do tenders, NHAI, they made NHAI, then figure out road tenders, then they'll keep replicating the same thing for now waterways, and now it's the same system that they implement, right? GST, right, on the taxation and compliance side is that template, right? What do I mean by that? Is it runs under a semi-private body, right? They have deployed certain large technology guys to make the backend, right? They will provide a simple front end for normal small people, and they will provide APIs for every single consumer in different shapes and forms. Rahul may use either ClearTax APIs or SAP APIs, so he will have a choice. So customer has a choice, right? And eventually there is a AI on government side which is tracking, which will catch people, right? You can't escape. Like, it is non-manual automated catching, right? Yeah. Now this template, right, is now very well developed, right? Government has still been relatively lax about fining people. I think that is starting this year, what we can see, right? But this template is now fully developed. We are 100% confident this template is developed. They're going to take the same template now every single way, right? What do I mean? At some point of time, I am expecting, right, labor laws to go digital, right? Because it's a very big area. ESG, right? The environment laws to go digital, right? So in our opinion, there's only one way, right? Which is for a company to just completely embrace technology, right? The sooner they do it, right, it will be easier for the next set of things, right? Because government has moved there. Whether you move there or you don't move there, you will just keep implementation for you, like, later on. The sooner you say fundamentally our government has moved, government has disrupted itself, right? Who are we now? We have to disrupt ourselves. The sooner we do this, I think, 50 different kind of compliances, we can't even imagine what all they come up with, right? If you look at, the OECD markets and so on, and look at the labor laws that they have, and, OSHA and these, health and safety things, we are just starting the journey. I 100% agree with Rahul. We are probably in a 20-year journey of compliance. We are 3 years in. There's 15 years left, and everything will be on technology. The more you can look at your technology stack within your company and say, what all damn thing can I throw out, and what are the new shiny things I can implement, right? Which are modern, kind of day oriented, the better it will be.
Okay, I think very well said, Rohit and Rahul. You two, I think, give a meaningful perspective here. I think those are great insights. Thank you so much for taking part into this conversation at etcfo.com. Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, Rahul, for your perspective. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned to a special series, Future of Compliance, where we will explore various aspects of compliance with the top CFOs of India, Inc. and industry experts throughout the next 3 months as part of this initiative. Stay tuned to etcfo.com. Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Amol.
Thanks.